All right, thank you for tuning into this session. Just glad that you're watching, and hopefully this is helpful for you. Let me just start off in prayer, and we'll go from there. Father, I just thank you that we can just have some time to talk about technology and the role it plays in our lives. Technology is everywhere, and it's pervasive, and Father, I just pray that you help give us wisdom when we deal with the technology that we use in our lives, Father. And I pray that you would keep us from it overwhelming us and distracting us from you, Father. I just pray these things in your name. Amen. All right. I'd like to start off this talk with a little bit about what I do. So this session is going to be about digital addictions, or also kind of more broadly known as behavioral addictions. And my vocation is something that kind of is related to that. So I am a UX engineer, which is a user experience engineer. And what I do on a daily basis is I look at applications and I figure out how people can interact with them better. Similar to how a architect would plan out a building and how it flows, I do a very similar thing with applications and websites and various digital mediums. So what that would look like is I would sit down with someone who wants to develop an application, and I would kind of see what their goals were and what they wanted from the application, and a lot of times I'd build up like a prototype for that application and then test that with various people that might use it. So those are called usability studies, and they're really common in my field, and it just kind of helps me know how the target audience is going to use the application. Where do they struggle? Where can we improve it? That sort of thing. So maybe a good example of how user experience, why do companies even invest in it? So there's a classic example in Amazon. It's called the $300 million button. And this is early on in the Amazon days, but Amazon had this flow where you would shop on their site and you would make a cart of items, and then you would go and check out. But when you checked out, it would ask you to register first so they could know who you are and where to send the stuff and all of that stuff. So they did some research on this flow of building a cart, checking out, and they wanted to see where they could make it easier for the user. One of the things they heard from their research would be something along these lines: I'm not here to enter a relationship, I just want to buy something. So they started looking at their flow and they started thinking, how can we make it easier, make the bar lower for someone to buy something? So what they ended up doing is they got rid of the registration button, period, and they replaced it with a continue button saying that you need to create an account to make purchases on our site. So just by getting rid of the button that says register, they were able to net a profit of over $300 million. And it's probably way more than that now, because if they would have kept it on there, that would have been, that was just the first year. They gained an extra $300 million just by changing that one button. So that's why companies invest a lot of money in small interactions on their websites. Seemingly small, but they have a huge impact when you scale it up. So I bring that up because these tech companies are spending a lot of money making these applications to ultimately make a profit. That's what companies do. But that has a side effect. Since companies are refining these applications over and over and over and over again, and really fine-tuning them to speak to us as users, we find ourselves in this position that it's so good we can't get away from it. And this is one of the reasons why it's so easy to fall into a digital addiction or behavioral addiction in the tech arena. For example, a lot of people during this COVID season have upped their buying online. I know I have, just because Amazon makes it so easy. And when you start talking about the social applications like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so on, these follow the same rules. They have UX engineers and UX designers working on these, refining them to a point where their goal is to keep you on that platform as long as possible, especially for those social sites. Their product is you. It's your eyeballs. Facebook sells your eyeballs. That's how they make money. Same with Twitter, Instagram, all of those. Those ads you see are little things that make them money. So they want to keep you on their platform. So they're going to refine that application over and over and over and over again to really speak to you. So it's no wonder that this has become a problem in our lives. We have our phones on us at all times. We have access to these things all times. As soon as we have 5 minutes to ourselves, 5 minutes is even generous. When we have 5 seconds to ourselves, just by ourselves, how often do you reach for your phone? It's because that's how they've designed them. They want you to do that. So they're working that way. So these applications and websites are designed to keep you looking at them and using them. And some of it isn't necessarily for evil purposes. Like in my career, my current job, I work for an insurance company, and I see refining these experiences as helping people manage their life insurance and annuity. It makes it easier for them. They don't have to call us as much or to make a payment or whatever it is. So a lot of these companies do give you value that way, but sometimes it gets to the point where it's no longer helpful, it's harmful. There's something in my field called a dark pattern. And these are patterns that designers have created that actually get in your way to do something that wouldn't be good for you. And you've probably experienced them before. One example that I know I've hit multiple times is if you're trying to cancel a subscription account. If you've ever tried to do that, you know it's not as easy as signing up for the account, and that's on purpose. They don't want you to cancel. So they purposefully design their flow for canceling your account in a way that makes it more difficult. And that's called a dark pattern for obvious reasons. That's not helpful to you. If they were trying to be helpful, it would just make it easy and just click a button and cancel. So we've kind of established how these applications get the way they are. Now let's dive in a little bit deeper on behavioral addictions themselves and what they are. But before we do that, I want to let you know, so Steve Jobs, everyone knows who that is, the guy who really was the face of Apple for a long time. When he introduced the iPad, he was in an interview, and the interviewee was closing up and just asked him a softball question like, your kids must really love the iPad. And Steve Jobs' response was surprising. He said, they haven't used it. So that's interesting. The guy who invented the iPad and iPhone didn't have his kids use it. And he went on to say briefly that he puts in restrictions for the technology that he exposes his kids to. And that is fascinating, like that an executive in one of these big tech companies sees the danger of some of these devices and thus limits their children's exposure to them. So that should make you pause. And that's not the only example of this. There are many big Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and whatnot that send their kids to specialized schools that don't expose them to phones or iPads until like the 8th grade. That's very common in that area. They are restricting the limit of their own, restricting their usage of the supply that they create. So we as Americans typically use our phones 3 to 4 hours a day. And that is a shocking number, especially when you consider the structure of our lives and how much open space we have. So you go to work, you have certain responsibilities that you have to do every day: brush your teeth, get the kids ready, go to work, etc. That eats up a good chunk of your day, and you're only left with maybe a handful of hours that you can choose what to do with each day. And if you spend those 3 to 4 hours on your phone, that leaves you like 1 or 2 hours to build relationships with other people and have that quality stuff. That is concerning. We shouldn't give the best part of our day to a phone or to a tablet or to Netflix. We should really think about how we want to spend that time and use it wisely. So, behavioral addictions, basically that is any addiction that doesn't, that you don't ingest something with. So, you don't drink it, you don't ingest it in any way. It doesn't physically affect your body, but it's something you do. So some examples of that might be exercise can be a behavioral addiction. A lot of things we're talking about are behavioral addictions: addictions to your phone, addictions to binge watching TV, addictions to video games. All of those fall under the umbrella of behavioral addictions. Gambling is another one that often comes up as a behavioral addiction that people struggle with. So let's break down what a behavioral addiction is and the components that make one up typically. So behavioral addictions usually have about 6 kind of criteria that they usually find in them. So one of the first ones is they have compelling goals that are just out of reach. So you can think of the lottery as an example of this. It's a chance to win something big, but it's just out of your reach and it keeps you intrigued. Another one is irresistible positive feedback. And this is best illustrated by the Facebook like button. Like, you post things to get likes socially. That's a social affirmation. Another thing they often contain is a sense of incremental improvement. So an example of that would be leveling up in a video game or getting to that next high score. They typically have a task that becomes increasingly more challenging. You see this a lot in mobile video games where they slowly build you up and it gets harder and harder and harder and harder, but it never ends. One that's very much found in the realm of TV and watching entertainment is unresolved tension that demands a resolution. So you see this in TV shows. They leave you on a cliffhanger and you want to watch the next episode and then the next episode, the next minute, and then now you've just spent 10 hours watching this show. The last and maybe one of the more strong typical things you find in behavioral addictions is a strong social connection. This is why Facebook, Twitter, Instagram are so popular. They have that social feedback that we crave. So, experts typically say behavioral addictions are one of the most common forms of addiction out there. They say that most people have some form of behavioral addiction in their lives. And by they, I mean commonplace psychology. Typically, behavioral addictions are easier to hide from people, or they're more socially acceptable. So think like people don't typically give you garbage for being on your phone because everyone's on their phone. Think of that as an example. Another kind of interesting aspect of behavioral addictions is they a lot of times lack what is called stopping cues. So when you're using Facebook or Twitter, you've noticed that you can just keep going and going and going indefinitely. There's nothing to cue you to stop. So back when the newspaper was a thing, you would finish the article and you would close it up and you'd be done. That's a stopping cue. A lot of our digital media is specifically designed to keep you in it. So they intentionally avoid adding in stopping cues that help you remember to stop doing it. So that's why you can 2 hours go by when you're looking at your phone and you're like, what just happened? That's one of the reasons why. Some behavioral addictions are hard to fully abstain from. So a good example of this is eating and food, gluttony, if you will. You have to eat or you die. So you have to have some amount of it in your life. So it's harder to just cut it off. And even in our digital tech culture, it's hard to fully cut it off. I mean, I work in an industry where I have to go to work and it's how I pay the bills. I can't just cut out technology in my life because it's consuming me. I have to figure out how to moderate that back. And that can be really difficult when trying to face an addiction. So this is a difficult question that I was thinking about as studying through this. When is something you like become an addiction or a behavioral addiction? So when do you cross that line of, I really like to work out, but now it's an addiction? When do you cross that line where it's like, well, I like to look at Facebook every now and then just to keep up with people? When does that become an addiction? And that's where some of the worldly psychology really struggles to answer that question, because it's very variable. So one of the things that makes things a behavioral addiction to a worldly standard is if it starts harming your long-term success in something. So like it starts harming your relationships, it starts harming your ability to survive or make income. So that's kind of where they would say, okay, well now that's probably an addiction because you're working out so much that it's affecting your life in a negative way. Or you're playing a video game so much that you are no longer being able to work well or have relationships with people well. So that's how the world would describe it. But I would argue that the Bible has a better answer for us there that we'll get to in a second. Before we get there, I'd just like to say, like, this is something that I personally have struggled with. Like, I know for a fact that I have had addictions to my phone where, and probably still do to some extent, where 5 seconds go by and I grab my phone. Or I get passionate about some kind of new tech thing because that's just, I like technology and I like to see what it does. But I take it too far sometimes and it harms my relationship with my wife because it takes up my time, or my ability to serve in the church because I'm distracted, whatever it may be. So this is something personal to me, and I think that it's worth really examining your life to see where you have these leanings. Is it your phone? Is it something else? Is it not even tech? Is it something else in your life, working out, binge watching Netflix? And that's a really good thing to focus on. Okay, now let's kind of take a little bit of a turn and see what the Bible can teach us about these behavioral addictions. And I would really recommend watching the talks on idolatry with Andy and Chelsea. They're going to probably go into this even more because idolatry really is the heart sin of these behavioral addictions. But I'm going to take a little bit different approach, just so it's not redundant, after I take a drink. All right, so what can the Bible tell us about a behavior addiction? Well, one, it's an idol. Two, it can give us the root cause of why we struggle with behavioral addictions. So Psalm 106:36 says, "They served their idols, which became a snare to them." This really is the root cause of all of these behavioral addictions. We are putting something else ahead of what we ought. And the Bible also gives us the answer or how to solve behavioral addictions. And that is something that mainstream psychology struggles with because it's a heart issue at the end of the day. And the answer to behavioral addiction is worshiping the Lord and seeing the value of following Jesus. You see this in the parable of the hidden treasure. in Matthew 13:44. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. So that's a person who's putting their treasure in the kingdom of heaven. They're giving up all of this worldly stuff and realizing what's truly valuable. So the root cause really is a misplaced worship in our life. We're worshiping our phones or worshiping Netflix by giving it our attention. And to counter that, the worldly answer to behavioral addiction is just to replace that behavior with something that's less destructive. So that's not fulfilling. That's not ultimately what God has designed us for. He's made us to be creatures that worship him. And when we don't have that as our focus in our worship, no matter what behavior we replace our damaging one with, it's not going to be ultimately fulfilling, and it's going to leave us not feeling like we've solved anything. We've just replaced it with something else. So I'd like to kind of give this a little bit of an illustration and kind of tell you a story of three guys. The first guy, his name is Joe, and he's your video game nerd, right? He has taken it really far. So he gets up every day, and the first thing he thinks about is logging in to join a quest with his friends online. He barely works just enough so that he can feed and invest in these games that he really finds value in. All of his relationships are built in this digital world. Like, he connects with people through these games. He is always striving for that next level in that game or that next experience in that game. So that's Joe. And we also have Mike. Mike is the guy who has it all. He wakes up in the morning and instantly checks his email. He is focused on his job and what he does, and he does it really well, and he makes a lot of money doing it. He's very successful. All of his relationships are around his work. He has a lot of good friends that are co-workers. His primary way of measuring his success is in his wealth and what he can accomplish in his work. So these two guys have something in common. They are living a life that is not based in the reality of Christ. And that's where we get our third guy, whose name is John. He wakes up every morning and instantly reflects on what Christ has done in his life. All of his relationships are reflecting his love for Christ, and he strives to give glory to God. So, in a worldly sense, we see Joe and Mike, the video game guy and the guy who has it all, is very different. One we see as a loser, one we see as successful. However, the Bible tells us something really interesting here. It says that both of them are actually losers in the grand scheme of things. Ecclesiastes says, "What has a man from all his toil and striving of heart, which he toils beneath the sun?" So the Ecclesiastes is telling us that no matter what we are investing in our lives, whether it's video games, whether it's phone, whether it's TV, whether it's our jobs, whether it's our exercise or physical fitness, all of those things are a waste. They are not worth our time unless we have Christ at the focus of it. So I would encourage you all to look at your lives and say, where am I putting my focus? Am I putting it in something that it shouldn't be? So these digital addictions, they are a litmus test for where your heart is. You need to strive to be more like John, who is trying to reflect Christ. Anything else is not worth it. So whether you're it's okay to like video games. It's okay to want to do well in your job, as long as Christ comes first. And that's the real issue of it. And it gets back to idolship, but it's just kind of looking at it a little bit different way. Really wanted to address the fact that just because you have an addiction that the world sees as not, kosher, not good, like being addicted to video games, or anything for that matter, that doesn't mean that you can't, it's just as bad as the guy who has all of the worldly things. Like, one is not better than the other. They're both bad. The only thing that's good is Christ, and that's where our hearts should be focused on. So I'm going to end this with some practical tips for dealing with a digital addiction. So these are just kind of like short little ideas to help you get past whatever it is. So the first and most obvious is going to be pray for your thoughts to be focused on Christ and honoring to Him. Go to the Lord with your sinful idolatry things, whatever they may be. That's the number one thing you have to do, is you have to go to Christ, and you have to get Christ in focus. So some other kind of more, down-to-earth things or things you can do tomorrow is purposely place your phone out of reach at certain times. So you get home from work, and this is something I did for a while, is I get home from work and I would put my phone upstairs on the charger, and I wouldn't go back to it for the rest of the evening. And that helped get it out of sight, out of mind, and helped have more relationship with my wife and those around me. Kind of in a similar vein, you can try a tech fast. So just like we fast from food, you can fast from tech in your life for a certain amount of period, and that can look different in your life depending on your situation, but it's good to just let your phone go for a while, or be purposeful not to play video games for a month or whatever it may be. This is something I also did, especially around some video games that I was going to often. I just had to step away from them for a while, and that was really fruitful in my life. So this is kind of an interesting one, and you can also kind of reframe your thoughts. So this was something I saw online and through my research, but you can change your thoughts from I can't or can't to don't. So for example is, instead of saying I can't use my phone during family time to yourself, say I don't use my phone during family time. So that does something in your brain that says, I'm not the kind of person who does this, versus I'm the kind of person who struggles with this. And sometimes that kind of framing of things can help get you past a hurdle. And I think there's also some biblical truth to that. I mean, you think of 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore anyone who is in Christ is a new creation. The old has passed away, behold the new has come. When we find our identity in something, we value it. So by you changing your mental language, it can help confirm your identity and where it's at. So additionally, we have, so those who are TV bingers, one of the things you can do, and this may be difficult, but stop the TV binge after the cliffhanger has been resolved. So after you're watching a show, start the next episode, and after they resolve that cliffhanger that you are so worried about, stop it there, instead of stopping on the cliffhanger itself. Another point of reflection and a litmus test you can do is say, ask yourself, what am I getting out of this behavior, and do I really need it right now? And this is a good one for phone use, is when you pick up your phone, and maybe you can even put this on your phone, is this what I need to be doing right now? Is this helpful for me? Because if you're just picking up your phone and scrolling through Facebook to kill time, that's convicting just by thinking through it. Another tip would be change up your routine to avoid times and places you typically abuse technology or whatever it may be. So try to make your circumstances different so that you're not in the temptation to use that technology in that time. So another one is create some stopping cues for the things that you struggle stopping at. So when you're using your phone, set a timer, or do it in a time where you know you're gonna have to put it away in 5 minutes or something of that nature. I don't know what the stopping cues could be, but try to be creative about it and figure out ways that can remind you to stop doing something, because it's really easy to just keep scrolling and keep scrolling. Lastly, use your phones. More and more smartphones have started adding things to help you not use them as much, and use them. So like an easy one is use airplane mode. Like if you are gonna just tech fast, put your phone on airplane mode, and tell your loved ones that you're doing that so they don't freak out. But that can just help you not be distracted in different things. So hopefully that was helpful, and you got some tips that might be able to that you can apply in your life when faced with some of these challenges. I really appreciate you listening and tuning in, and again, definitely watch the other videos because they are going to go into things even more in depth, especially the idolatry, because like I said, that's really the heart of these addictions, is a heart who craves something other than Jesus. Thanks.